Hey, thank you for watching. I'm glad you're here. A few days ago, I started reading A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J Maas. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I had never heard of Romantasy novel. I've known about, romance novels all my life. My mom would take me to the drugstore when I was a little tyke, and I'd see these, paperback books on I'm old. I'd see these paperback books on this, rotating book display thing, and these drawings of these hunky guys with these shapely women kind of in these weird, awkward kind of embraces and the hair blowing and stuff. So I've always known that romance novels were a thing. I didn't know about Romantasy. I didn't know about these fantasy novels with the romance. And so I thought this is kind of interesting. Blends the romance genre with the sci-fi, fantasy genre that appeal to a lot of men. And so I was kind of surprised to learn that these mostly just have a female audience. Okay, that's another term that I hadn't heard before. The book boyfriend. Up until a few months ago, that's the first time I had ever heard of the word book boyfriend. It's such an odd and anyway, so I'd never heard this before, and I realized there's this whole other world out there that I had no idea about, and I'm kind of interested in it. So I started reading. I was told that I should start by reading A Court of Thorns and Roses. It's a really good book, and I did. I started a couple of days ago. And there was a few things I wanted to talk about, and I'm sure I'm going to have some questions. And what I mostly wanted to get was, when you first get into these novels, there's sort of some world building and some character building that goes along. So I want to know kind of what to pay attention to. So I'm just going to share with you sort of my first impressions and thoughts of the book after the first couple of chapters. I'm not very far into the books at all yet. I just wanted to get some of your impressions also. So if you put down in the comments kind of what I should be watching out for, and if I missed anything really important about the books that I should be paying attention to, maybe some foreshadowing that I didn't notice or something. So I'm not going to share everything. Almost every line is important as you start one of these books. But one of the things I noticed about the way the author writes is she doesn't just full on explain everything right at the beginning. She takes her time and lets the story develop, and it's kind of that show don't tell rule. And it's difficult to do in a novel. I think it's tempting for some authors just to say, okay, here's the world and here's the rules and here's the characters and everything. We don't even learn the main character's name until the second chapter. And I find that appealing. I'm sort of just experiencing this, almost like watching a film in my mind, as I'm reading the novel. And I like that. I like that about it. So there's a lot of things I liked so far in the first couple of chapters. I highlighted some things out of the book. I told you I'm old. So I highlighted, and what I didn't anticipate, I'll show you. So white blinding screen. So I'm sorry about that. I hope that's not an issue for anybody. But yeah, so I highlighted in the book a couple of passages, and so right at the beginning, anything but fairies. So we know that fairies are a thing, and we learn that the mortal people, in the book, which this main character represents, they're afraid of these fairies, that apparently they're dangerous. So I find that interesting too. I mean, fairies in most of the genres I've ever seen before are these lovely creatures that almost seem like they protect the forest or something, but they're not dangerous to people or any, they wouldn't harm anything. So I found that kind of interesting too. It's kind of a different take on it. It's almost like being afraid of vampires or werewolves or something like that. So the main character's out hunting in this first chapter, as everybody knows. So if you haven't read these books, or if you haven't read this book specifically, I would say I'm just going to go through it. And if you don't want spoilers or anything like that, I'm not who you should be watching. But if you have read these and kind of want to go through it with me, I'd encourage you. I'm not going to go through these quickly. I've got, some other stuff going on. And so maybe, you could side read this along with me if you want to, and then maybe refresh your own memory as to what's going on in the story so that maybe you can help me figure out what's happening here. So we see that the main character is hunting, and then the next quote that I highlighted, she found a place over a brook where there's a few holes in the ice that suggested that the place was still being frequently used to water game. And that's one of the things that we do as archery hunters and that's something I've done in the past, is you set up in a quiet spot over a place where the animals are going to come and water. It shows me that at least the author, if she hasn't done this before, has done some research into kind of some hunting techniques. So she sets up over this brook where there's a few holes in the ice, and it's winter time, and you can tell that the character's cold. It talks about her rubbing the snowflakes out of her eyes, and the snow, the way the snow falls, and how it's clumping and clinging onto the bark on the trees and stuff. And I live in a place where there's a lot of snow too. I found this very descriptive because there's a lot of different ways the snow comes down, and she was talking about when it gets really quiet and the snow's just descending in the big flakes, and it just sticks to everything as it comes down. And I like snow like that. It's a very calm and peaceful thing. It also talks about the main character's deprivation and her hunger, and so she's desperate. And I like that too. I feel like there's probably desperate is going to be a theme in these in these books. So she's hunting also for her family. She's providing food for her family, and we find out a little more later about this. But this quote: "Sometimes I would even indulge in envisioning a day when my sisters were married and it was only me and father, with enough food to go around, enough money to buy some paint, and enough time to put some colors and shapes down on paper, canvas, or on the cottage walls." And I like this. So it gives us insight into the main character being an artist, and that she kind of resents her sisters and wants them gone so that they'll be able to have a little more financial security. And we don't learn a lot about the family situation yet, but that's coming in chapter 2. We get to get a lot more insight into the family, into the sisters, and into their financial situation. But you can tell they're hungry, and she's the one providing all the food. There's a lot of pressure on this main character to provide. So there's some desperation, and you can kind of feel that. Anybody who's ever been in that situation where you're providing for a family, you know there's some stress there, and especially because she's hungry in the moment, and that's a difficult thing to experience also. and then she And then she talks a little bit about the stolen hours in a decrepit barn with Isaac Hale didn't count. She's talking about things that are lovely or interesting, and she talks about noticing the snow and the way the moonlight or the sunlight bounces off of the snow. She's talking about lovely things in her life, and this relationship, this purely physical kind of animal relationship she's got with this guy named Isaac Hale, doesn't count. Those were hungry and empty and sometimes cruel, but never lovely. Maybe not for her. I kind of get the feeling that she broke this poor kid's heart. That maybe he longed to be with her. For her, maybe he was just some diversion, I don't know. But the fat clumps, like I was talking about before, the fat clumps that gathered along every nook and bump of the trees. She puts it really nicely there. And I find it interesting just because she's looking at this relationship with this kid from and I'm assuming she's young. We don't really know how old she is just from the first chapter. But then out comes a doe. Out of the woods, a doe appears, and she says her mouth watered. So she's that hungry to where seeing something to eat caused her mouth to start watering. So you can sense the desperation. One of the things that I always get when I'm hunting, and I've never been that hungry while I was hunting to where I needed that immediate satisfaction of a kill to satisfy my hunger. But whenever I've been hunting, my heart starts to pound out of my chest, and I can hear it in my ears, and you can feel it in your neck and everything else. Everybody's different. Everybody responds to stress differently, and in this one, her chest tightens. And I think that was kind of an interesting thing too. I guess I'm just relating some of these things to things that relate to my own experiences and how I relate to the main character, even though she's a young girl. I don't really relate too much, but yeah. So her mouth waters when she sees the doe. Her fingers trembled. So much food, so much salvation. And then this next part, I found this interesting also. She doesn't pray because it says, "We mortals no longer kept gods to worship, but if I had known their names, I would have prayed to them all of them." So that desperate situation where it brings people to pray to a being more powerful than themselves. And most of us, probably most people that are watching this, might have an idea of God that we worship, okay? And so but this author is explaining this world to us, that in this world the mortals no longer had gods to worship. If they did, that she would. And I thought that was an interesting take on the culture of these people. So then as she's set up over this doe, and she's about, she's going to kill this doe, and she's desperate to kill this doe, and her aim has to be good, and everything has to function properly. People don't talk too much about bows can malfunction, arrows can veer off if your fletching isn't right or something like that. It's a delicate process, and I don't know what the technology of their bows were or anything, but it talks about a wolf coming, and she sees this wolf, and it's set up to come after this doe. She's not the only predator after this deer, and the wolf appears. And the wolf is this monster-sized wolf. She said it was as big as a pony, which, I've seen some wolves. They're huge, but I've never seen one as big as a pony. And she's talking about, if it was a fairy, I should already be running. Now, that's an interesting insight into their world, too, because the fairies being able to turn into a wolf or shapeshift or whatever. So it made me question, okay, what else can they become if they can become wolves? And so she's not actually sure all the way through this whole process of whether or not this is actually a fairy or actually a wolf. And so she has this special arrow. I thought this was a fascinating thing, too, that the author came up with. She says, from songs sung to us as lullabies over our cradles, we all knew from infancy that fairies hated iron. But it was the ash wood that made their immortal healing magic falter long enough for a human to make a killing blow. The fairies can be damaged by the ash enough so that they can be killed. And apparently they've got a magic that allows them to heal. And the ash wood causes that healing process not to work so that you can actually kill the fairies, and that they hate iron. Well, she happens to have this arrow that is made out of ash, and which is really rare because smartly the fairies, or also the high fae, and I don't know what the difference is yet between high fae and fairies, but the high fae had burned all of the ash forests. And I guess there were some secret ones, but ash was a really rare wood in their world. I mean, obviously, if you had like if you were Superman, you'd gather up all the kryptonite, right? And that's what these guys have done. Is they've gone through and eradicated all the ash that they can. If they're ever in a war with the mortals, they don't want that weakness out there. I like that aspect of it too. It makes sense. So she's got this special arrow that she can use, and she knows she's got to kill this wolf. And here's another comment on the fairies. After all their kind had done to us. It doesn't go into specifics here, obviously. There's some bad blood between the fairies and the mortals. And the fairies have kind of their own land that they live in, apparently, the Praetion or whatever. So the main character, in a fairly exciting scene, she shoots the arrow at the wolf because the wolf comes, jumps out, kills the deer. She launches her special arrow at the wolf. And I really like this part too, where the wolf looks at her almost surprised that this hunter, this hungry young girl, had actually shot a killing blow at this wolf, and looked at her. And then she sends one of her normal arrows. She only had 3 arrows, and she sends one of her normal arrows through its eye, and it finally dies. And then so now she's got the doe, but she's also got the wolf. In hunting, you have to be able to get the game back to your house. Obviously, she wasn't really close to home, and she had to drag this. She either had to drag or carry this deer, and she hated leaving the wolf there, which makes sense too. But she did take the time to skin the wolf and wrapped it around the deer. So she gets the deer, and she's on her way home. It talks about the bits of ice came free from the gray stones of the cottage, revealing the faded ward markings etched around the threshold. So there's these ward markings they have around the threshold of the house, and her father had once convinced a passing charlatan. So obviously the judgment that the main character made was that whoever sold her father these markings was a charlatan, was a con man, to trade the engravings against fairy harm in exchange for one of his wood carvings. Now we get some insight into her father also, that he's also kind of an artist. He carves wood. That there was so little that my father was ever able to do for us that I hadn't possessed the heart to tell him that the engravings were useless and undoubtedly fake. Mortals didn't possess magic, didn't possess any of the superior strength and speed of the fairies or high fae. So again, I don't know the difference or what the distinction is here. But the man, claiming some high fae blood in his ancestry, had just carved the whirls and swirls and runes around the doors and windows, muttered a few nonsense words, and ambled on his way. So here we see that the main character doesn't believe in any of this mumbo jumbo. She doesn't believe that these wards are helping, and that her father traded his carving for nothing. Okay, and she resents it a little bit. You can tell there's some judgment here. Okay, and then Feyre And I did look up how to pronounce it. So it wasn't just a guess on my part. I did look up how to pronounce it. Feyre. Elaine's soft gasp scraped past my ears. I blinked back the brightness of the fire to find my second eldest sister before me. Okay, so she has an older sister, second eldest. This is the middle child. Okay, so Elaine is the middle child. So we know a couple of names. We know Feyre is our heroine. She's the hunter, and Elaine is her sister, just older than she is. These little discoveries, they make me happy. And I liked this description. 8 years of poverty hadn't stripped from her the desire to look lovely. So now we're getting some insight into the fact that this family used to be pretty wealthy, and that they had fallen into poverty within the last 10 years. So 8 years of poverty she's talking about. But Elaine still made an effort. She was still making an effort to look good, which I can appreciate. So Elaine then asks this question that kind of makes Feyre a little angry here. She's saying, will it take you long to clean it? Me, not her, not the others. I'd never once seen their hands sticky with blood and fur. I'd only learned to prepare and harvest my kills thanks to the instruction of others. Have you been in this position? You've probably been in this position before, where somebody asks you, how long will it take you to do this? When they're desperate for you to do it, and you had to learn it on your own. They've never made any effort to do it for you, to do it themselves. And they could, because you learned to do it on your own, right? So I think Feyre here is a little bit resentful. Her sister's like, oh, here, let me help. Nope, she doesn't want to help. She wants it done for her. And Feyre, you can tell. I can identify with this feeling a little bit. I think most people can. I think most people can identify with that a little. So then we get a little bit of an introduction also into Nesta. This is the oldest sister, and that sometimes said, and talking about their father again, saying, he could find work if he wasn't so ashamed. Okay, so Nesta's judgment about her father is that the reason that he's not looking for work is because he's ashamed of his position. Because Nesta hated him for the injury too, for not fighting back when the creditor and his thugs burst into the cottage and smashed his knee again and again. This tells me that the three girls' father had gotten in with the wrong people, and that he had maybe borrowed some money, what we look at as like a mafia type figure. That he'd borrowed some money and wasn't able to repay, and they came in and smashed his knee. You could understand that if he'd been a wealthy person and lost his fortune, you could understand him borrowing money to try and maintain the lifestyle, which, I think that's something we see a lot in literature and movies and TV shows and stuff. So it makes sense to us that could happen. And so they come in, they smashed his knee again and again. And I don't know how to feel about this, because instead of feeling bad for him that happened to him, they kind of resent him for it, it looks like, a little bit. Even Feyre, in one exchange, when she says something to her father, and then, in her mind, what I really wanted to say was, you don't even bother to attempt to leave the house most days. Were it not for me, we would starve. Were it not for me, we'd be dead. And like I said before, you can understand how Feyre feels here. She's the one that the whole family's depending on. She's the youngest, and yet she's the only one providing food right now, and she's the means of their survival. And it seems like they don't really appreciate the sacrifices that she's making. They don't even want to pitch in and help when it comes to cleaning the animal or selling the skins. She talks about selling the skin later and everything too, and then they even complain about how she smells. It's like, you don't want me to smell like this. Don't make me go out and kill the animals. So you can understand the way Feyre feels, and I think you can also have some sympathy for the dad. I think he's a sympathetic figure here. He's a broken man, literally and figuratively. Feyre is going to get some fire going so they can cook, and she notices there's not enough firewood, and she expected her sister Nesta to chop wood, and Nesta picked at her long, neat nails and said, I hate chopping wood. I always get splinters. Besides, Feyre, she said with a pout, you're so much better at it, and it takes you half the time it takes me. Your hands are suited for it. They're already so rough. And we all know somebody like this, right? Don't we all know somebody like that? oh, but you're so much better at it than I am. Why should I try? And I don't want to get my hands dirty. I don't want to chip a nail. In this situation, we can all identify with Feyre, and obviously she's the heroine of the story so far. At least if I'm reading things correctly. And we're supposed to see the resentment that she has for her sisters in different ways. Nesta's almost mean. She's just kind of mean and looks down on everybody and doesn't want to get her hands dirty. Her father is broken. Her sister is kind of just head in the clouds, kind of. And they talk about the way they want to. The way they wanted to maintain their wealth, and everything, or not act like that they were poor, but they're poor and they don't accept their situation. They don't accept the reality that they're all in, and so they're hoping for something else to happen when, it's not happening. And Feyre is the one going out and actually, providing and doing something for the family. It talks a little bit too about, Feyre's artwork that she's had. She had some paints in the same summer when they had some coppers. I don't know where they use the word coppers to describe money. I've heard that before, but I don't know specifically where they had extra coppers, and her sister Elaine gave her some paints, and she was able to do some decorative painting around the house and on some of the furniture, and it describes some of it. It says, violets and roses I'd painted around the knobs of Elaine's drawer, the crackling flames I painted around Nesta's, and the night sky whirls of yellow stars standing in for white around mine. I think the author paints a picture of symbols that we can associate with these three sisters. Okay, so the violets and roses around Elaine's drawer, the crackling flames around Nesta's, she's, and then the night sky whirls of yellow stars standing in for white stars around mine. So she didn't have any white, she had some yellow. And I think those symbols are probably really important and probably going to be really descriptive about these three sisters. I think that's probably going to be important later on in the story. I don't know, maybe. maybe I don't know. Maybe it's nothing. They'd never commented on it. I don't know why I've expected them to. You ever feel like nobody appreciates anything, not a single thing that you do? If you're a mom, you've probably said that. In fact, I know my mom said it a lot when I was growing up. Not one person in this house appreciates a single thing that I do. And that's something, that's something that people feel sometimes. The striking thing here is that Feyre is the youngest daughter, of this. He used to be he was a wealthy guy, and now he's broken. He's got these three daughters, and the youngest is the one providing for him. And I can understand that feeling that it all falls on me. I'm the one shouldering the burden of this whole family, and they don't even appreciate it. They don't even appreciate that I've made their lives a little more beautiful by providing some artwork and some decoration around the house. I mean, it seems like she's literally doing everything to carry this family. It talks about their mother a little bit. Mother's not there. We learn why. She was imperious and cold with her children. It sounded like she was the life of the party. She was a socialite, somebody who was suited to being wealthy. And we see this, and that she didn't really have too much of a connection with her children. And Feyre, being the youngest, when she was on her deathbed, she asked Feyre to look after the family. It's kind of a fascinating thing that a mother would see her children and ask the youngest of the daughters, and she couldn't have been very old. I don't think we've seen ages yet, but what I gather is that she was a very young child, and that the mother's asking her to take care of the family. And she made a promise. And in our world where we'd forgotten the names of our gods, a promise was law. A promise was currency. A promise was your bond. So they had almost replaced worship of gods with, the things that were important to them were their promises. That there was something in their society that was all important, and that was your word. And I like that. I think that's a healthy thing, and I think we could use a little more of that in our society. And this passage gives us a little bit of insight into why her mother may have chosen Feyre to make that promise to take care of the family, where she says, or maybe impending death had given her some clarity about the true nature of her children, her husband. She knew she couldn't ask her husband. As a father, that would to me, that would be a kick in the guts if the mother's asking the youngest daughter to take care of the family. But I think she saw something in her daughter. And maybe it was the impending death, and I like that the author came up with that. That's kind of a beautiful thing, that impending death might bring some clarity to the way you see the people that you love. Then we get a little more into Nesta's love life. You know, they're around the table, they're eating the deer, they're eating at least part of the deer. We get into Nesta's love life a little bit here, and they're Thomas Mandray, the woodcutter's second son, not even the firstborn son, the second son, and you know, like they're in love, I guess. And so, and I like that, you know, it shows Elaine as sort of enamored by this idea of that they're in love, you know, and that's a great thing. And Fair is looking at this really practically. They can't afford a dowry. You know, if we're gonna offload you onto somebody else's family, you're just another mouth to feed, right? And so he'll never marry you because it won't benefit their family at all. You know, and then Nesta fires back at Farah a little bit. I thought all you wanted was for us to get out of the house, to marry me off and Elaine so you can have enough time to paint your glorious masterpieces. Sarcasm does exist in this world. Farah had admitted, you know, while she was hunting, you know, to herself, and apparently maybe she said something in the past that she was kind of hopeful to get rid of these sisters. And I just find it interesting that the older sisters look to her leadership. It's like they have almost accepted that their youngest sister is the provider for the family and is in charge of the family. Or to marry off me and Elaine would suggest that the father's not even part of the decision here, that it's up to Farah, even though she's the youngest of the three. So Farah's a pretty powerful figure in probably not just this family, but probably wherever she goes. And then so Nesta keeps going. Nesta seems like the kind of person that just loves hurting people with her words. So at least I don't have to resort to rutting in the hay with Isaac Hale like an animal. She says it at dinner in front of Dad. I think this is it's the worst kind of betrayal. Poor Dad, you know, he doesn't want to hear any of this. Like, yeah, he knows the kids are growing up and everything, but I don't want to hear about it. What an awful thing to say. Anyway, Dad didn't flinch. He's like, ugh. He probably gave an eye roll. He let out an embarrassed cough. Okay. He never said a word to Nesta. I didn't highlight this part, but he never said a word to Nesta from either fear or guilt. Apparently wasn't going to start now. Even if this was the first he was hearing of Isaac. So Farah's got this relationship. Everybody apparently knows about it. And now Dad knows. Farah's not looking to Isaac Hale as kind of some future salvation for her either, because she still has to take care of her family. You know, and then we've got Farah saying, hey, we can't afford a dowry for either of you. Okay? So we've got her saying we can't afford a dowry for Nesta or for Elaine. She's kind of the head of the household here. Even though she's the youngest girl, she's the head of the household. She's just telling them like it is. She's being very practical about this. And then Nesta fires again. She can't get enough of going after Farah here. If you depend on somebody that much, even for the very food that you put into your mouth, I would think that you'd back off a little bit. But here Nesta's not really looking at the big picture here. So she says, "You're just jealous. I heard them saying how Isaac is going to marry some Greenfield Village girl for a handsome dowry." Farah admits, so had I. Isaac had ranted about it the last time we met. I guess this was some sort of arrangement that they had that Isaac Hale was going to marry this girl. It looks like, you know, he's marrying for a dowry. I think Isaac Hale, I think he's in love with Farah. I don't know how he couldn't be, and I think it's kind of sad. And I think that Farah broke his heart, and I think she doesn't even realize what she'd done to this poor kid. So that's my opinion about it. You know, and then Nesta keeps going. You've probably known somebody in your life who knows exactly what to say to you that will hurt you the very most. You know, knows that thing that really pushes that on that last nerve that you have. And Nesta is that kind of person. It looks like she's really good at finding that one thing that's really gonna get at you. And she says, keep it up, and someday, Farah, you'll have no one left to remember you or to care that you ever existed. Maybe that's one of Farah's biggest fears, and then she storms off. And then Elaine, I don't think she really gets who actually has the power in this situation. She's going after Nesta, showing sympathy for Nesta here because Farah had hurt Nesta's feelings, saying you can't marry the woodcutter's son because we can't afford a dowry. And so she goes after Nesta to try and comfort her when it's Farah really that's been attacked the most. She's just trying to be practical. So you can kind of see that. So then we get some words from Dad here. We need hope as much as we need bread and meat. We need hope, or else we cannot endure. So let her keep this hope, Farah. Let her imagine a better life, a better world. I like that he still is holding on to some hope, that the dad is still holding on to some hope, even though it looks like he's kind of given up. And so the impression that I had reading this entire chapter was that dad had given up. That he's just doing his carvings, filling his time every day, but not really taking seriously what his responsibilities are, what he could possibly do, how to get his fortune back. A lot of guys that are ambitious, they'd be worried about getting their fortune back, and they'd be trying to do something, whether they fail or not. This guy looks like he's broken, but at the end of the chapter, he's like, we got to have hope. And so there's a glimmer there for him, but for Farah, there's no such thing. So she has given up. She's given up hope, even though she's the one working. And that's a really interesting dichotomy there of, you can look at, on one side, dad's really not doing much, and he's not really providing anything for the family, but he has hope still, even though he's not putting out any effort. And then we've got Farah on the other side, working and providing everything for the family, doing everything, even beautifying their lives a little bit with some decorative painting, that's going on in the house. And she's in charge. She's in charge of the daughters of dowries. She's in charge of whether or not they're making a good match. And yet she has no hope. And that's right after, she found a doe and killed a wolf that was going to take that doe away from her. And yet she's given up all hope. But she hasn't given up on work. So I can understand quite a bit why this type of story appeals to a certain kind of reader, because, a lot of us going through stuff in our lives feel like we work and work and work, and it doesn't really matter, and nobody appreciates us. And you want something good to happen in your life. It almost feels sometimes like hoping for that is wrong. And I hope that's not true. I hope that's not true for me. I hope it's not true for you. I'm going to keep reading these books. Let me know what I missed. I know it's only a couple of chapters, but let me know what I've missed. Did I miss anything really important in the story? So let me know what you think about, the way I'm seeing the characters and the way I'm seeing the story. Having read the books, are you seeing anything that I have missed that I should go back and look at again that will help me to understand? Please don't give me any spoilers, because I kind of like, I know some people are okay with spoilers. I like being surprised. I like experiencing the story, as it unfolds. And I've seen some things online that are sort of spoilers for me. I kind of know some of the general things that are going to happen in the future, but not too many. I've been able to avoid most of them. So please don't try and spoil it for me in the comments, but maybe, if you can direct me back to in the first couple of chapters to something I might have missed that is a good foreshadowing. Did I get anything right? Did I notice something important that's going to be important in the future? Please let me know if I did, because it makes me feel good about myself. So I'm going to read a few more chapters. I probably won't read so little every time, but I find the first couple of chapters of a series like this really, really important, because it builds a foundation. And so I wanted to go through that kind of slowly, but I'll probably do a little bit more for the next video. Tell me what I should be watching out for. I hope you're well. Thank you for watching. I'm Dark Wood, and I appreciate you.